Today's episode is brought to you by We Break You Buy. Interested in sports cards and memorabilia? Check out We Break You Buy on TikTok. We Break You Buy is a small operation run by three brothers, offering spots for a chance at winning some incredible sports cards and memorabilia. That's We Break You Buy. Check it out today on TikTok. Why Wasn't It Better? I am your host, Patrick Darms.
And I'm your co-host, Anton Paras.
And we have a veteran return guest, Paul Kind. Welcome back to the podcast.
Welcome back, Paul.
Guys, thank you very much for the invitations. Always a pleasure to get on your podcast.
It's always a pleasure to have you. And it's even more of a pleasure because this is a very special movie that we're covering today, Paul. It's your first Bond movie with us.
It is, and funnily enough, probably the most exciting Bond film I ever saw as a child.
Really?
Yeah, it was like, because I think there was I was thinking about this the other day, and it was like, I think, first of all, I probably was my birthday, and that was the reason why we went to see it at the cinema. It was also Roger Moore, who I'd been watching as a kid on like the TV show The Persuaders and The Saint. So I knew him really well. And, the film's just full of all the great Bond tropes. So what's not to like?
It's the right attitude to have. Was this your first Bond film in the theater?
I think it might have been. I'm sure I saw You Only Live Twice and on Her Majesty's Secret Service as a double bill. But I wonder if that was maybe a year earlier, possibly. But it's just a vague memory. Whereas this one, I just remember being really excited about it and being in the cinema watching it.
I'm jealous. But the best we had was Pierce Brosnan and Daniel Craig for my generation. Which I'm not complaining about that. I love me some Pierce Brosnan, but
I would say nothing to complain about there.
No, not all of them. Some of them.
The first Pierce Brosnan was fantastic. Because
it's amazing.
It was a bit of a gap, wasn't it, between the last Roger Moore one and then this one, and they really did take it.
Oh, it would have been Timothy Dalton. It was a 6-year gap.
Oh my God, how bad am I? Yes, forgot all about poor old Timothy.
That's true.
Yeah, there was a legal battle that ensued, and then the Cold War ended, and some people assumed that Bond was over, and Pierce Brosnan was like, no. Pierce Brosnan and the new producer, Barbara Broccoli, that was her first one, where she really took the reins there. But they proved that Bond could thrive in the post-Cold War world.
Very relevant to today. The next favorite to play James Bond, of course, we mentioned him before, Aaron Taylor Johnson, if either of you guys have seen his films.
Some of them. I don't really have an opinion on him one way or another.
Yeah, I think it's going to be one of those ones, once you see him do a Bond film. I mean, I wasn't really sure how Daniel Craig was going to be, but I actually thought he did a fantastic first film.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, you're right, though, Paul. Like, I too did not know what to expect with Daniel Craig. When it was announced that he was going to be taking over for Brosnan, I was like, okay, I don't really know much about this guy. But it worked out well initially.
Well, it seems like all the Bond films, like the first, apart from maybe on Her Majesty's Secret Service, I think all the Bonds, all the actors that did their first Bonds did a really good job.
Yeah, they did. Because this would have been, Roger Moore was primarily known for TV, as was Pierce Brosnan at that point. Pierce Brosnan was not really known as a movie star when he became James Bond. He was most famous for Remington Steele and maybe like Mrs. Doubtfire, but again, not the star of that film.
No, and he's Irish, right?
He is.
So no one really knew how he was going to be. Now, am I right in thinking his first film is that the stunt where he jumps off the dam?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
What a start!
Yeah, that is one of the all-time greatest openings to any film ever, in my opinion. Unbelievable. Now, but this film, we haven't even mentioned the title of today's film. It's Live and Let Die. It's the 8th Bond film in the series, Roger Moore's debut. This is just a reminder to our audience that we are covering the Bond films and most franchises that we end up covering. We are going to try to do them in, for the most part, release order. Anton, would you say Bond and the Marvel films are probably the most prolific films that we're covering? Because there's very few franchises at this point that have 20 plus films.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. It's definitely something that we've had a ton of fun covering on the show.
So this is our first Bond film of season 5. We are going to be covering one more film in the Bond series this season. It will be The Man with the Golden Gun. We'll get to that a little bit later this year. And Anton, it will be the 50th anniversary of The Man with the Golden Gun.
Well, shouts out to Christopher Lee.
And Hervé Villechaize. You a fan of that one, Paul?
No.
I didn't think so.
Again, I was looking at like the Roger Moore films. Live and Let Die, cracking start. Man with a Golden Gun, yeah. But then The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker are my two favourite Roger Moore films outside of this one. As a British person, I remember sitting in the cinema for The Spy Who Loved Me with the ski scene at the beginning, and he comes off the cliff and he unclips his skis, and then his parachute opens up and it's got the Union Jack, and then the Bond theme plays. God, it brought a tear to my eye, it did, even as a young kid, and I still love it today.
That is Roger Moore's favorite one, too, so I can totally see why. But for now, it's Live and Let Die. I'll intro this for us. So, as we mentioned, this is the 8th film in the Bond series. When James Bond investigates the murders of 3 fellow agents, he finds himself a target, evading vicious assassins as he closes in on the powerful Dr. Kananga. Known on the streets as Mr. Big, Kananga is coordinating a global threat, using tons of self-produced heroin to flood the market. As Bond tries to unravel the mastermind's plan, he meets Solitaire, a beautiful tarot card reader whose magic is crucial to the crime lord's operation. Live and Let Die was released on June 27, 1973 by Eon Productions and United Artists, directed by Guy Hamilton, screenplay by Tom Mankiewicz, based on the novel by Ian Fleming, starring Roger Moore, Yaphet Kotto, Jane Seymour, Julius Harris, Jeffrey Holder, David Hedison, Gloria Hendry, and Clifton James. The budget was $7 million, that is $48 million adjusted for inflation, and the box office was $161 million, that is $1.1 billion adjusted for inflation. So, Paul, you were getting into this already. This was the first Bond film that you can recall seeing in the cinema. But when I gave you the option of covering any Bond movie that you wanted, why Live and Let Die?
I think it's because I haven't actually seen it for quite some time. So I was really interested just to see like my sort of 8-year-old version of this film, and then seeing it in my eyes today, whether it all kind of holds together. And nothing better than sort of revisiting your childhood. So I had so many good fond memories of this film, and I thought it'd be good to test if that was still the case. And I would say that for the most part, it does. I think there are issues with it, which I'm sure we'll discuss during this podcast. But what a fine start for Roger Moore.
This is certainly a swashbuckling way for an actor to begin their tenure as James Bond. And it's kind of interesting that it's the 8th film in the series. He was already the 3rd actor to play the character. He was originally linked to playing Bond as far back as 1962, even before the series began. And, he didn't get the role until this one. He was already 45 years old. He's still to date the oldest actor to ever play James Bond. He would end up being in 7 films. And this was a different direction for the series, right? Anton, we agreed that on the previous film that we covered, Diamonds Are Forever, the series was already moving in a far more lighthearted, campy direction.
Yeah, and it definitely didn't take a lot to see, especially considering how Diamonds Are Forever went. That was definitely a different direction for the series.
Yes. And while this different direction that would continue with the Roger Moore era would prove controversial with some fans, and it would end up drawing plenty of criticism, it did prove enormously popular at the box office. This one's interesting, right? Because I don't know if it gets the credit it deserves. For one thing, Live and Let Die ensured the series would be a long-lasting one, right? The previous 2 films had been pivots. On Her Majesty's Secret Service was an attempt to replace Sean Connery, which did not work out the way the producers wanted. So they end up bringing Connery back for a one-off with Diamonds Are Forever. But they had to get this movie right with Roger Moore. Had this movie flopped, the series probably would have died, and it would not be the long-lasting series that it is today. I think this is going to be a lot of fun to talk about. This is always been one of the Bond films that I've enjoyed. It was one of my earliest memories of seeing James Bond. I don't know how old I was when I saw this. Probably 6 or 7. Whenever my dad got me into James Bond. Just this was one that I remember watching a lot on TBS or TNT or Anton. You may know what I'm talking about. Whatever cable channel showed the like the 15 days of 007 or whatever that
Yes.
marathon was.
Yeah, and that's where I was also always looking forward to during the holidays as a kid. What was it, the 15 Days of Bond or something?
Yeah. One of those channels, TBS, TNT, USA. I don't know. They're all the same thing in a way. But yeah, I always liked this one as a kid, and it's one that I've seen quite a bit. I am a fan of Roger Moore's. I understand why some fans of Connery's or Daniel Craig's may not be. I just mentioned a little bit ago, the Roger Moore era has a very particular tone to it. And if that's not your cup of tea, this film would probably be tough to get into, but let's get into it. Gentlemen, anything to add before we start the production history?
Just wanted to mention, folks, if you like stunt actors and respect what they have to do, it's crazy thinking about what the stunt actors had to go through for this film.
Yeah, let's get into the production history.
All right, let's do it. So, while Diamonds Are Forever was being filmed, screenwriter Tom Mankiewicz thought that it would be interesting for the next film to feature black villains because of the Black Panther movement that was going on at the time. And that is how Live and Let Die was chosen as the next film. Guy Hamilton, who had previously directed Diamonds Are Forever and Goldfinger, he was chosen to direct this, and since he was a jazz fan, Mankiewicz suggested that at least part of the film be shot in New Orleans. Longtime Bond screenwriter Richard Maybaum had to pass on working on this as he was too busy with other work at the time. Now, on the Diamonds Are Forever episode, Anton, we mentioned how Broccoli and Saltzman, the two producers, of course, we any Bond fan will know their name. They knew that Connery's return for that film was a one-off, so even before that film's release, they were already thinking about who could play the next Bond. United Artists, they were thinking big, Steve McQueen or Paul Newman. United Artists were very much in favor of an American playing the part. Guy Hamilton suggested Burt Reynolds. Let's pause for a second and think about what this film would have been like with Burt Reynolds.
My Name is Machine. Sharky Machine.
I think in an alternate universe it could have worked, but I'm glad it didn't.
Do you think he could have actually played a British secret agent? Do you think they would have somehow morphed it into like an American agent story?
He couldn't have played a British agent, to be sure, but I think the way this film exists in New York and New Orleans, I think that part of the Burt Reynolds of it all could have worked, but I think we're all grateful that it didn't.
Yeah, I don't think he could have done the suave part particularly well.
No. And I say this as a fan of Burt Reynolds. I really like a lot of his movies.
Absolutely.
He's not a British suave, but he's a country suave.
Yes. He's a smooth talking, sure. He would have definitely drank bourbon, I'll tell you that. But this was actually more realistic than you'd think. Cubby Broccoli actually approached Reynolds about doing it, but Reynolds declined, very much agreeing with us. He said that Bond should be played by a British actor. Among the actors to test for the part were Julian Glover, who would later play Kristatos in For Your Eyes Only. And just shout out to Julian Glover. He's been General Veers in The Empire Strikes Back. He was Walter Donovan in Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. He was, Anton, what's that old dude's name on Game of Thrones?
We actually mentioned him in an early episode.
Yeah, we did.
Grand Maester Pycelle.
Yes, that's it. What movie were we talking about? In Indiana Jones?
We were talking about Indiana Jones, yeah.
Okay, yeah. He's also a voice of Aragog and Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. So pretty huge franchises. So Glover was one of the actors considered. John Gavin, Jeremy Brett, Simon Oates, John Ronayne, I don't know who that is, and William Gaunt. The main front runner for the role was Michael Billington. Broccoli actually met with Anthony Hopkins about playing the role, but Hopkins did not think that he was right for the part. Now, Roger Moore had been on the producer's radar as far back as 1962, like we mentioned, when he was sought to play the role originally in Dr. No, but at that point, that's when he was beginning his role as Simon Templar on The Saint. At the time they were beginning pre-production on this film, Roger Moore was starring in a TV show called The Persuaders, Paul, you mentioned this, alongside Tony Curtis. It was a hit in the UK, but it wasn't doing well in the States. And the show actually let him out of his contract so that he could take the role of James Bond. Moore was determined to not imitate Connery's performance or his own prior performance as Simon Templar on The Saint, and Mankiewicz worked Moore's persona into the screenplay by giving him more comedic scenes and a light-hearted approach to Bond.
One thing I did want to add to something I saw in the research, really interesting that they went with Roger Moore, especially considering even his age compared to Sean Connery when he first started.
I think one of the things working in his favor, although he was actually older than Connery, he did look younger. He had a very youthful appearance, especially in this film.
Absolutely. I mean, and just for the listeners, Roger Moore was 45 years old for Live and Let Die, and Sean Connery was actually, Pat, if anyone would know, I feel like you'd know. How old was he for Dr. No?
32.
Exactly.
How old was Daniel Craig then when he did his first stint?
38.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Pierce Brosnan would have been 42. Dalton would have been 40 or 41.
So then we have to ask ourselves, how old is Aaron Taylor Johnson?
He wouldn't be the youngest, believe it or not.
Oh.
We talked about this on the episode, but Lazenby was 29.
Right, that's right. But Aaron Taylor Johnson's 33, so if within the next few years, about the mid-30s.
Yeah, which I think is a good age to play Bond. You never really think of Bond as a super young guy. He's almost always presented as a experienced, seasoned agent.
Exactly.
And of course, it was the 1960s when everyone looked 40 because they all smoke and drank.
Which is actually why you bring that up. Is I suddenly realised this is the first film that I remember James Bond not smoking. Did he? I'm not sure whether he smoked in On Your Majesty's Secret Service, but
he did.
Definitely yeah. So this one, suddenly crossed my mind. It's like, oh, he hasn't smoked a cigarette in this.
No, and it's interesting that you bring that up because, of course, he smoked cigars in this film.
Yes,
I think it was a choice on Moore's part, from what I've read, just to differentiate the character, because I've read that Roger Moore didn't smoke cigarettes, but I've also seen pictures of Roger Moore smoking cigarettes, so I know that's not true. But I think he was just determined to make the character different than Connery and just put his own spin on it. And if you also notice, Paul, he does not drink martinis in this film. He sticks to bourbon.
Yeah, can you? What is the story behind the original martini then?
Bond in the books basically is a trash can. He'll drink anything. He drinks a lot of bourbon in the book, so Moore drinking bourbon in this film is, of course, faithful to the literary character. Bond does drink martinis in the books, too. Best guess is that when they were filming Dr. No, they just pulled one thing from the novels, and then here they were just pulling another thing.
So real quick, I gotta pop out. I don't know how long it's gonna take. Hopefully it's a couple minutes.
Okay. You want me to just plow through the rest of the production history?
If you don't mind, sorry.
Yes, okay. The character of Solitaire was originally black, and Diana Ross was considered for the role. Broccoli and Saltzman decided to stick to Fleming's description of a white woman, and after considering Catherine Deneuve, they decided to cast Jane Seymour in the role. And Paul, I think we're grateful for that.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, how would Catherine Deneuve be at that time? Would she have been in her early 20s as well?
I don't know. I'm not familiar with her, to be honest.
She was in Cat. The only one film I know of, I think she was in Cat People with David Bowie.
Oh, okay. I've heard of that. Yaphet Kotto was cast as Kananga while filming another movie for United Artists, Across 110th Street. He was chosen directly by the studio chairman David Picker. Kotto recalled being informed on set that he'd been cast as the villain in the next Bond film, completely catching him by surprise. Now, Tom Mankiewicz created the character of Sheriff J.W. Pepper to add comedic relief. A little bit more on that later. We are certainly going to talk about J.W. A secret agent on whose side?
Brilliant.
To develop a better feel of how voodoo was practiced, the producers took Hamilton Mankiewicz and production designer Sid Kane to scout New Orleans further and then to Haiti. Despite viewing actual demonstrations of voodoo, due to political unrest in Haiti at the time, it was decided not to film there. Jamaica was chosen instead. Now, while searching for locations in Jamaica, the crew discovered a crocodile farm owned by Ross Kananga after passing a sign warning them that, quote, trespassers will be eaten, end quote. The crocodile farm was then incorporated into the script, and it also inspired Mankiewicz to name the film's villain after Kananga. Filming began in October 1972 in New Orleans. Roger Moore was initially unavailable due to suffering from kidney stones. Man, that must have been amazingly painful.
Having endured kidney stones, I definitely can agree with the fact you can't do anything else.
What could you do?
You couldn't.
Nothing.
It's just such an extreme pain. Yeah, I think they say it's as close to a man will experience giving birth in terms of
Oh,
pain, apparently.
I see. Well, you can read more about that in Roger Moore's diary that you said you just bought.
Yeah, looking forward to that.
Yeah, it's a great read. He goes into some detail about the kidney stones in there. In November, the production moved to Jamaica, which filled in for the fictional San Monique, which again, San Monique was clearly being modeled after Haiti. In December of that year, production was divided between interiors filmed at Pinewood Studios in the UK and then location shooting in Harlem. The brief car chase was filmed on FDR Drive. The boat chase was filmed in Louisiana around the Irish Bayou area. 26 boats were built for the production, 17 of those were destroyed. Now, the speedboat jump scene over the bayou, which was filmed with the assistance of a specially constructed ramp, unintentionally set a Guinness World Record at the time with 110 feet cleared. That's 34 meters. This was the first film not to feature Q until Casino Royale in 2006. Saltzman and Broccoli decided not to include the character, feeling that, quote, too much was being made of the film's gadgets, end quote, and they decided to downplay this aspect of the series, much to Desmond Llewellyn's annoyance. This was the first film in the series not to be scored by John Barry, who was busy with another project. Here's the interesting part. So, Paul McCartney and his wife Linda, they wrote the title song, which everybody knows the title song to this film. It's one of the most famous title songs in the series, probably one of the most famous rock songs of all time, would you say, Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you've been to the James Bond concerts, and they always save this one to the end because it really is
Yes.
the people's favorite, I think.
Yeah, I would say this is possibly the only song in the entire series that is more famous than the film itself.
Yeah, yeah, and of course, the Guns N' Roses covering this as well, putting their spin on it, also like enhanced it, I think, to a whole new generation.
Right. Skyfall was huge, the Adele song. But again, that's associated with the film. The Duran Duran song View to a Kill was big. That's maybe bigger than the film, but I think this is clearly more famous than the film.
Yeah, there's just something about that song. It just sticks in your mind. I think just the way the song is constructed is just fantastic. And as a opening title song, it's just perfect.
Maybe the best song in the series. I don't know if it's my favorite one, but it's up there. And I guess there was a timing thing too, right? I would say, you were alive then. It was probably a toss-up, but McCartney, the most famous musician in the world in 1973? Probably.
Yeah, because I think I don't know how long Wings had been put together prior to this song, but it's certainly
Not long, only a couple
yeah.
years.
So it's
Because the
certainly
Beatles broke up in 1970.
yeah. So I mean, I would have been probably too young. I mean, I obviously knew of the Beatles and things like that, but his name was pretty well known and to be associated with the Bond film. And then when you're sitting there watching it and listening to it, it just blows your mind every time. It's great.
So get this. This is the story behind the song for this film. George Martin, the producer, which, by the way, this was the first collaboration between McCartney and Martin since the Beatles broke up. Pretty cool. So Martin, he brought the song to the producers. Harry Saltzman, in all of his infinite wisdom, he asked who was going to sing it. Yes, that's right. Harry Saltzman wanted someone else to sing the song. I was he just a complete idiot?
Well, do you think it's because all the previous songs had been sung by a female and maybe
Well, Tom Jones did one.
that's true. Yeah, yeah.
So this really makes me wonder about Saltzman. Like Saltzman was wondering, like, oh, maybe we can get someone like Aretha Franklin to sing it. This dumbass, he wants someone else to sing it, and George Martin had to very politely tell him, like, no, you don't understand. If you don't want McCartney to sing it, you won't get the song. And what I have read is that Saltzman had to be convinced by Broccoli and others. Like, no. Okay, fine. We'll get McCartney to sing it.
Wow. I wonder what it would have sounded like.
We have an idea because we get the lounge singer in here that sings it.
Yeah.
Which that opens up a discussion that I didn't even realize it until the latest rewatch. The title song exists in the film's universe.
Mm-hmm.
Technically, it does.
Yeah.
By the way, Paul, do you like Wings?
There's a couple of, I would say, 2-3 songs I really like. But it's sort of post Beatles stuff. I'm not a massive fan, to be honest.
But you like the Beatles?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's some fantastic songs.
Yeah, I'm a Wings fan. Obviously, it's not as it's not on the level of the Beatles, but I like their stuff. Band on the Run's one of my favorite albums from that era.
Yeah, because I remember the album cover with all the different celebrities on the front.
Christopher Lee's on the album cover.
Yeah, probably some of them you probably won't recognize. They're very British.
I know the big names. Like I know James Coburn, Christopher Lee. That's probably it. So this song, of course, ended up being nominated for an Academy Award for Best Song. It lost to The Way We Were. And I actually read one of the reasons that George Martin ended up composing the score is they didn't really have any money left over to hire a regular composer. Which,
accountancy.
Yeah. Well, this is one thing that's worth noting. This basically had the same budget as You Only Live Twice several years before. So they weren't really adjusting the budget to keep up with inflation.
Well, I have to say, I mean, George Martin did a fantastic job.
Oh, I'm so glad he composed this. I love the score to this film. It's funky.
Yeah.
It might be my favorite non-Barry score of the series. I really do like it.
Yeah, I think the as you say, the styling and the way it blends into the film, I think it just complements each other really, really well.
And one of the best things about it too is that McCartney finished the song so far in advance that Martin was able to incorporate the song all over the film score, which you often don't get in a lot of the later Bonds, where the song, you would have the opposite problem where the song doesn't get turned in till far late in the process, which doesn't give the composer enough time to work it into the score.
Yeah, and it really worked out, didn't it?
It did.
Yeah, especially as you say, when they're in the saloon place, the bar, and that the female singer sings it as well. It's great.
Well, let me text Anton real quick here.
Yep.
See how far along he is. Man, I don't even want to watch the Champions League final. Real Madrid.
What a way to win it. I mean, what a way to get through to the final. Mind you, Bayern Munich gave it away. Let's face it.
100%. Have you ever seen Neuer make an error like that?
No.
I
mean, he's kept them in games because of the saves he's made, and then just because I thought like, he's just gonna catch it, and then for whatever reason, it just falls away, and then there was all the hoo-ha with the offside as well.
Yeah, they did blow the flag early. I don't know that Bayern would have scored, but
it just becomes a sore point, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, Madrid, look, it's their competition.
It is. I mean, they've won it so many times, they don't include all the stars on their kit anymore, do they?
No, they ran out of room.
I mean, what worries me, though, is like, next season they're going to have Mbappe. How's anyone else going to win this?
Who would you say the team best equipped to beat them, right? It would probably be Man City, right?
Yeah. I still don't understand how they didn't get through, given now that they're like, in a situation where they have to win every game to win the league, and I'm sure to God they're going to do it, and yet come that semi-final, they completely muffed it up.
I don't know. I mean, I'll watch the final, but like, I don't think Dortmund have any chance.
No. The thing with Ireland, isn't he ultimately his goal is to go to Real Madrid? Wasn't that his initial destination, and then
That's what I've heard.
His dad managed to persuade him to spend a few years at Man City and then head off afterwards.
That's what I've heard. I mean, can you imagine him on that team? Do they need him?
God, I don't know how you would stay within financial fair play if you had him, Mbappe, all those different players.
It's so weird because they don't need him to win La Liga. They don't need him to win the Champions League. They don't even need Mbappe. Mbappe needs Madrid far more than Madrid need him.
Yeah, he could end up as a Kane. Although he's won loads of French league titles, so that doesn't really matter. It's like,
right. Who cares about the Uber Eats league? Well, I think we should try to maybe plow ahead here.
Yeah, okay.
I have not heard from Anton. That's it for the production history. Before we talk about why it wasn't better, we're going to take a brief pause as we hear from one of our sponsors. Today's podcast is brought to you by Sprizzy. Looking to skyrocket your YouTube channel's growth? Meet Sprizzy, your video's ultimate matchmaker. Their tailored ad campaigns connect your content with viewers who are already looking for videos like yours. With Sprizzy, you're not just getting views, you're gaining subscribers who are genuinely interested in what you create. Are you ready to boost your reach? Visit Sprizzy.com today and let's launch your channel to new heights. Sprizzy, the smarter way to promote your YouTube channel. And we're back. It's time to talk about why wasn't it better. Number one, Paul, let's start with Roger Moore. You either like him or you don't. He is a completely different James Bond than Sean Connery. I happen to really like him.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely bringing that sort of character that he created with the Saint and also with the Persuaders, and it's a lot lighter touch, as you were pointing out. But there are still elements where he's quite cold in the way that he deals with people as well. But I really liked it. I thought it appealed to a broader audience, I think, because of the type of character it was, which I think probably helped why it was so popular. Would you think?
I think the fact that he approached it with a lot of confidence and he just hit the ground running with it. There wasn't like a scene where you had to like, quote unquote deal with him taking over for the character. His first appearance as Bond is you don't get him in the pre-title sequence. You just see him in bed with a woman asleep, and that's it. It's pretty nonchalant. And he just looks really comfortable in the role, and I think that's why it works. Tongue firmly in cheek, he nails all the one-liners. He's comfortable, he's confident, he's relaxed. He has this like playboy attitude about everything. And I think they, just like we mentioned in the production history, with how Mankiewicz tailored the script to fit Moore's personality, that matches the tone for the film. And I think all of those elements are why it works.
Now, would it be fair to say that even introducing Roger Moore's character this way in the film was a bit of a course correction for Lazenby's introduction?
Oh, you mean this never happened to the other fella?
Well, just I mean, even when we think about for Lazenby's intro, there was a lot of iconic lines, definitely more. I'd say a bigger build up to the eventual like reveal, like here's Lazenby as James Bond, James Bond, delivering that line in the opening of On Her Majesty's Secret Service versus this was just a very nonchalant, oh yeah, I'm here for the job or I'm here for whatever my next mission is.
I think his first line is asking that woman, "You're not married, are you?"
Well, I think, Patrick, as you say, the tone is very much set that he's like this playboy agent rather than, so like the Daniel Craig or any of the others where they're fighting immediately. He's first shot, as you say, he's in bed with a woman in his own place, looking very relaxed.
As relaxed as one can be. Anton, do you like Roger Moore? Do you like him in this?
Absolutely. I mean, Roger Moore had to step into some pretty big shoes, but there was a lot of care and decision of selecting him, and he's quite a classy James Bond.
Yeah, he is. I don't know. Paul, don't take this the wrong way. He's so freaking English. Like, I guess he really, him and Daniel Craig are the only Englishmen to actually play the character, right? Because Dalton was Welsh, Connery was Scottish, and Brosnan was Irish, and then Lazenby was an Australian.
But if you look at, do you remember the title sequence of The Persuaders?
No.
When they do the, if you get a
I've
chance,
never
just
seen
look
it.
at it. Oh, okay. So basically, you got Tony Curtis and Roger Moore, and you see kind of like their life through the title sequence from when they were a kid all the way up to where they are today. And if you look at the Roger Moore one, would be the template as to how to become a secret agent. He goes to Harrow, so he was in the rowing team, he goes into the army, etc., etc. And you think, well, that's a pretty good blueprint to become a secret agent. Just, all British, very posh, privileged, playboy.
Does he have a title in that show?
Oh,
Does he have a peerage?
Yeah, he's a lord. Yeah, he's
Yeah,
lord
okay.
someone. Yeah,
I can see that. Yeah, Roger Moore seems like very upper class, and I know, having read his biography, he actually came from very humble origins in London. His father was a policeman, very working class background, but his persona, especially in this film, is very much upper class. I don't know if he gets enough credit for what he does in this film. It's one of the all-time greatest recastings for a movie character like James Bond, I think, ever. If you really think about it, this is like the equivalent of like Indiana Jones being recast.
And this is a fun subject matter. How often do we get major characters that get recast that are received so well? It's very rare.
Very rare. Batman?
It's hard.
Is there any other obvious ones? There's got to be. But I think you're right, Anton. It's a short list. Spider-Man?
I mean, Spider-Man, even then, there's going to be a lot of folks that still say, no, Tobey Maguire's my Spider-Man. I don't know
Right.
about this Tom Holland kid.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was a couple of missteps with the Spider-Man one anyway as well.
Yes, there have been. But yeah, this franchise, it was at a critical point in 1973. Lazenby had the one-off, which, I mean, on Her Majesty's Secret Service retroactively became a classic, but it wasn't loved in 1969. Diamonds Are Forever made a lot of money, but it was absolutely a downgrade from the classic Connery era. There was questions being asked about the viability of the series going forward. And Roger Moore, he may have lacked Connery's dangerous swagger, but just an incredible charm, an incredible warmth to his character. He's a very likable guy. Like I just feel like that's probably why he worked as the character there's a smarminess to the way he approaches the character, but I think ultimately he just comes across as a very likable guy.
And it's in large part due to the way he's portraying the character.
Yeah, definitely.
It's the right execution. Otherwise, it just wouldn't come off as charming.
And Paul, you alluded to this earlier. His second film, Man with the Golden Gun, it's seen as a low point in the series. It has its fans, but it's generally seen as a slump. It made a lot less money than this. He really wouldn't find his footing until his third film, which was The Spy Who Loved Me.
Absolute classic. But I think going back to, if you look at all of his films, there isn't a lot of introspection with him. He has just this total confidence. He always has the one-liner. He's almost like the original one-liner for anything that happens. And I think that's what I like about him. And that's what makes then the people that then took it over after him, they could take it in a totally different direction. But the way he put it together, I thought was really cool.
He has some great lines in this. And you're right, everything. He has a joke for everything. All the stuff he says to Kananga's henchmen. I crack up when he says butterhook.
That's a good line.
When Teehee's trying to take his watch off, butterhook. And then, honestly, my favorite one, when Rosie tells him that he won't kill her after they just made love, he says, well, I certainly wouldn't have killed you before.
So it's a bit...
Although, you know what, Paul? You pointed out something earlier that I think this would become much more prevalent in his second film, The Man with the Golden Gun. For as charming and warm as he can be a real dick.
Yeah, I think to me, the scene that stands out is when he basically coerces Jane Seymour to bed and then has to listen to her talk about losing her virginity. And you could see on his face, he's just like, just answer my question, and she's
Yes.
whistling on about, I feel free or I've lost my skills. And he's like, well, you're pretty useless to me now.
Right.
And it
He's
was
like,
like,
yeah, what does he say? He's like, I may have stacked the deck slightly in my favor. Although we can talk about that now if you want. I was wondering about that because technically he does trick her, right? But she does pull the lover's card out when she first meets him in Harlem. So was that just destiny?
Yeah, because she still had her powers then.
Right. So was that just going to happen regardless of whether or not he did it?
Well, this is the paradigm I try and sort of battle with is, does she sleep with him because the card tells her to sleep with him, or is she in love with him and the card is just reinforcing that fact?
Are we going down the path of this film is a lot more deeper than we may think? It's actually questions about fate and destiny.
I would love to have that discussion, Anton, although I don't think the film is at all.
Yeah.
I think we're giving it way too much credit, but I will give it credit because I do like this film. Back to Moore really quick. He looks amazing in this movie. He never looked better. He was fit. Those suits look good. Anton, you like your men's wardrobe as much as the next man. When he arrives at JFK with that overcoat and the Royal Navy tie, is that the best Bond has ever looked in the series?
I mean, the man knows how to put on an outfit. We'll say that.
Does.
And I know you gentlemen like your watches, so what's your feedback on the one he wore in this film?
Which one? There's two.
Oh, the one with the magnetic.
Oh, it's the classic Rolex Submariner.
Okay.
It's a big watch too. It's a heavy
incredible.
watch.
It's a
Would
watch
you
that I'd love to own. Unfortunately, I don't have $20,000 just lying around.
would you like the little circular saw on it as well?
Of course.
Yeah.
Who
Okay.
wouldn't?
Yeah. Very handy.
He doesn't always have it on, even though he's supposed to. In the boat scenes, he's wearing a Tissot because they didn't have the Rolex available for him when he first showed up in New Orleans and they were filming the boat chase. He's wearing his own watch. I think it's a Tissot. So it's technically 3, including. I think that Pulsar was the first digital watch ever, if I'm not mistaken. The one where he looks
Oh.
at when he wakes up in the beginning. I think it was the first digital watch.
So he had a different watch during the speedboat chase.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
It's not the last appearance of Rolex in the series. He wears a Submariner in the next film, and then Seiko takes over for the rest of Roger Moore's tenure. And then I believe he has on a Submariner in License to Kill, and then ever since Brosnan took over and into the Craig era, it's been Omega, Omega, Omega. And I'm not complaining because I'm a fan of Omega, but
I was going to say no complaints here.
no. And just shout out to Omega. We're still waiting for you to sponsor us. Just ready and waiting.
You just keep plugging away.
Yep. Anton, also, one of the most iconic outfits of the entire series is that black roll neck that he's wearing at the climax in San Monique. Iconic.
With a 44 Magnum.
Yes, a 44 Magnum, and what I would describe as the most outrageously massive leather holster I've ever seen in a film.
And I totally thought it was a very, very interesting scene.
Oh, we can talk about that. Real quick before I forget, did either of you catch, after they get captured and they're getting served champagne, Bond puts the holster on the tray that Whisper's carrying and he tells him keep the change?
Yep.
So
Good
great. Your champagne, sir. Shall I open it? Oh my gosh, can't wait to talk about Whisper. Anton, I know you had to step away for a second. Are you aware that Roger Moore kept a diary during the filming of this movie?
Yes, I remember seeing that.
Okay. Have you read any of it?
I have not gone too deep into Roger Moore's diary, no.
Oh, it's a real hoot. Paul just ordered it. It is worth your time, Paul. It's worth the money. I'm disappointed he didn't do it for the rest of his films because I don't think it was a ghostwriter. It seems pretty candid.
Any particular highlights you want to share with our listeners?
Harry Saltzman seems like a real moron.
Okay, nice.
And there's a bit of discussion about the racial stuff in this film. Apparently, there was a crew member who the rest of the crew referred to by a racial slur as part of their nickname.
Oh,
And Roger
right.
Moore suggested, like, maybe we should use a different name. It paints Moore in a very favorable light. He comes across as a bit needy, like any movie star, but he was really excited for the role, and he was suffering from kidney stones during some of the scenes that he was filming. And he was a real trooper on this. My takeaway from it is my appreciation for Roger Moore grew after reading it.
Now, it's not quite the same comparison because, of course, Colonel Gentleman from the Venture Brothers is a bit more of a homage to Sean Connery. But do you remember the scene, Pat, where we actually get a look at Colonel Gentleman's diary?
I do.
Yeah, and it's just you think it's going to be deep stuff, but all it is childhood toys that Colonel Gentleman did not have growing up that he would have loved.
Among other things that he talks about, yes.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. Paul, have you ever seen that series?
No, I haven't. Is it worth a look?
It's pretty funny.
Yeah, there's a lot of love in that series, especially for Bond.
I'll put it on my list.
Yeah, it's worth a watch. It's pretty raunchy. Next reason why this wasn't better, it's time to talk about our boy JW. One of the most polarizing characters in the series. It seems like people tend to either love him or hate him. I don't like JW Pepper.
Because?
This is going to be a long-winded answer. I think some of his lines are very memorable, but in addition to the humor of his character, which hasn't aged well, I think his character adds a lot of pointless screen time. One of my issues with this film, Live and Let Die, is that I think it's a little long and it has some pacing issues, especially in the second act. And I think if you remove his character, it would have no bearing on the plot whatsoever. I think the movie really slows down when he's on screen.
I totally agree. And there's really no great reason to have the J.W. Pepper character. He is really just for the sake of comedy relief. Otherwise, the plot could move along very well, even if his character wasn't involved. And Pat, it was in Diamonds in Forever. There was a very similar character, but not officially J.W. Pepper, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
He doesn't really have much lines either, just a couple.
Yeah.
There goes that son of
Um,
a bitch and saboteur.
Yep, exactly.
Anton, I
And
don't know if you caught this. That guy is in this film.
oh,
He is one of the other cops who works with JW.
and I mean, just just seeing how much the producer saw that and said, let's expand that role for this film.
Yeah, well, before I expand on that, Paul, what's your take on JW Pepper?
I remember as a kid thinking it was the funniest thing, and it was great. It was highly entertaining, had some cracking lines in it, and totally appealed to me. As you say now, maybe yeah, from a pacing issue and a relevance for the film, not necessarily, but he did have some cracking good lines in there.
He
And,
does.
and I'm not sure whether the film would be less because he's not in it, because I think he's so linked to it as that film. Well, in the latter film, the one after that, I think probably wasn't necessary. But for this film, I don't know. It's so linked that when you talk about Live and Let Die, you always kind of remember the speedboats and the cop.
Secret agent. On whose side?
Come on, they're great
Uh-uh.
lines.
10 fingers on the fender.
I think I've seen the real Ben Hur.
I mean, it's uncomfortable, some of it. He calls the one character Adam Boy, but then he also calls James Bond Boy, so I don't know what to make of that. And of course, this would become a trope in the 70s. Anton, this got me wondering, because you would think this is based on Smokey and the Bandit, but it's of course 4 years before that.
So maybe the spiritual predecessor.
I think it is. According to MI6HQ, which is a website, the inspiration for this character was taken from a series of Dodge Challenger commercials from the early 70s, where actor Joe Higgins played Sheriff J.W. Higgins. You can find all these on YouTube. So I guess they were popular enough that they decided to just write this character into the film. And as much as I don't like the character, I will give the actor Clifton James credit because he is playing the character as it was written. And he was doing a Southern accent. He's not from the South. He's a New York actor. So I'll give the guy credit for that. Like, he was a total idiot used for comedic relief. He was playing it as they wrote it. I mean, again, to your point, Paul, it was very popular at the time, so much that they brought him back. And then, of course, Anton, I know you know this. Paul, you might not, but you may remember it. He played the same character 8 years later in Superman 2.
Oh, really? God,
Yep.
I haven't seen that film
Yeah.
so long.
Yep.
Wow.
Played the same character, just with a different name, but he plays the same country sheriff.
I guess like maybe in an argument for if this film is looking at the extremes of stereotypes to be able to tell the story and just kind of create an environment, J.W. Pepper is the extreme of a stereotype.
You're right about that.
Yeah. When we think about our next reason for why wasn't better, of course, we have to get into just this general reason around the plot, the characters, and the production. And so when we really think about it, this is a pretty bizarre film to introduce Roger Moore as James Bond. I mean, would you agree, Paul?
Yeah. I mean, because all the other ones have tended to be people wanting to destroy countries and things like that, whereas this is all to do with drugs.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even just like the setting of it's during the popular heyday of blaxploitation films. Like you said, it has to deal with drugs. We have drug lords. We have voodoo. Really supernatural twist, and especially when you think of even the films before it in the series, this was quite a direction for the series. So even then, despite the fact that it really has all those elements, it still does follow that same Bond formula. It's Bond's on a mission, goes to an exotic location. There's, has some drinks. There's the Bond girls, the sexy women. We have some fun gadgets. There's an egotistical villain. We have some fun, memorable and henchmen. And then it's all wrapped up. And it fits that same escapism, magical realism, or not even magical realism, really just escapism template. It's just that this time it has a drug lord and voodoo flavor.
Yeah, like you say, some of the, especially like the Harlem locations and the fact that those areas would just almost seem so segregated, and kind of Roger Moore sort of being the only white person going around that area. I think they said something like it's like following a cue ball.
Yeah. And I mean, yes. But a very conscious decision to just pick up on the trend. Let's choose black exploitation as the focus of the film because it's what was popular.
Anton, I really like what you said. Yeah, there's some unconventional things in this film for James Bond, but the traditional Bond template is there.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you, Paul. Like some of the Harlem stuff, it is by today's standards probably hasn't aged that well. But Harlem was a very different place 50 years ago. They couldn't make this film now for a variety of reasons, obviously. But they really were trying to be progressive for the time. I think that is worth pointing out. While some of the stuff in this film has not aged well by our standards today, and I think intent should be a factor. And the filmmaker's intent was to include strong black characters. Tom Mankiewicz had a quote about not wanting the black characters in this film to be used for just comedic purposes. That's why J.W. Pepper was written into the film. They wanted to move away from that. And in the James Bond archives that I own, there was concerns from some of the exhibitors about the interracial romance not playing well in the South. And Cubby Broccoli said he didn't care then if it wouldn't play in the South. He didn't care. So I think that is worth pointing out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very brave to say, or at least it's a very brave stance to take.
Anton, you mentioned the Henchmen
Mm-hmm.
and the characters in this film. My favorite thing about this film are the villains.
Some of the most over-the-top villains and henchmen you'll ever see in film.
And I love them. I want to start with the main villain, Kananga, played by Yaphet Kotto.
Mm-hmm.
I love him. Super charismatic. He's really menacing at the same time. I love the dual personality threat that he represents. He is like voodoo crime lord, while at the same time he's the leader of this island nation. I think it's a pretty unique villain for the series. There's never really been a villain quite like him. And I love Yaphet Kotto's performance in this. I think he's great.
You have to say a big shout out to him because he's in my favorite film of all time, which is Alien.
Ooh.
And he was also in a film called Blue Collar. Highly recommend you look at that. It's got Harvey Keitel and Richard Pryor, and it's about like a robbery in a car manufacturing company.
Okay.
And
He's been in a
yeah,
bunch of good movies. He
yeah,
was in what's the one with De Niro? Midnight Run.
yes.
Anton, you a Yaphet Kotto fan?
Oh yeah, I mean, especially in this film, it's just it fits in so perfectly, and you really need that over-the-top performance to be able to just really lose yourself in the fact that it fits in this entire theme. I think that any less of a performance, it would have been a little too cheesy, but I think he actually did a really great job.
Oh yeah. I love his criminal underworld that they show. Stereotypes aside, I do think it's unique to the series. It's pretty solid world building from director Guy Hamilton. We hop around to a lot of different locations. None of it is confusing. And we get some great quotes out of it. Number one being just names is for tombstones, baby. It's so good. Take this honky outside and waste him. Pretty funny. They don't really explain why Kananga decided to eliminate the 3 British agents, do they, in the beginning?
Not only that, I almost completely miss like I can only expect that first time watchers would completely miss that he was even in the first scene.
He is. He's at the United Nations.
Yeah, but just no real focus on his character, just kind of glance over.
Yeah, you're right. Oh, you know what else I just thought of? So Solitaire's there too.
Yes.
So she's like she's his fortune teller and his diplomatic assistant, like secretary. Is that what?
Yeah, because she starts, when they go back to the office, he says, "Oh, let's start. I need to write a letter," and she sits down and pretends to.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Now, in regard to that opening sequence with the 3 assassinations, didn't you think they were slightly overcomplicated? Yeah. I mean, one is,
Yes, they were.
to kill someone using a detonator that somehow blows your eardrums and your brain.
Oh,
The other
wait, Paul,
one-
you're not familiar with ear dynamite?
No, it's a new technology. Can you imagine as a kid? It's like, wow, I didn't know that existed. Then the guy gets bitten by the snake, so he has to go through all of that ceremony just to then get bitten and get killed. And then the guy
Oh, it's a hard
in your
life.
lines, he gets stabbed, and
Baines?
then so they have to create that whole funeral and then have a casket that kind of hoovers people up. It just
I
seemed a
do
bit
like
convoluted.
the whole funeral gig.
Yeah, yeah. I did like it, but it just, in retrospect, I thought it seems a bit complicated for if you couldn't just take them out.
It's not the best pre-title sequence, but it does give us a great line, which I did not pick up on until like the fifth or sixth time I've rewatched this movie, which is when M's telling Bond the names of the agents killed. Bond goes, Baines? I rather liked Baines. We shared the same bootmaker.
Actually, a fun fact, you know the guy that gets killed by the snake at the beginning, apparently
Mhm.
he had a pathological fear of snakes, and you can see he faints at the end.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's
That's dedication.
understandable. The pre-title sequence is, I think, one of the weakest parts of the film for me, because like number one, Bond's not in it. Number two, if you don't have a lot of context, you really have no idea what's going on. And I guess maybe you're not supposed to because they explain it immediately after the title song. But
I think part of it's also just interesting thinking we're introducing a new James Bond, pretty big film, and also it's a pretty big departure from the themes that we've had in previous films. And then on top of that, we're introducing a total new villain set. It's no longer Spectre, right?
right, no more Charles Gray.
No more Charles Gray.
He's
So-
a way better villain than Charles Gray.
So I think I do kind of see it as really interesting that they're going straight into the action, like death, death, death. We are not slowing down. Here's your intro scene, and then eyes staring straight at you during the opening credits.
The stakes here are low. It's one of the things I noticed about this. So basically, he's sort of like Frank Lucas from American Gangster. He's just planning to distribute cheap, in this case, free heroin.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something James Bond should be actively involved in stopping?
Well,
It's a
I
good
suppose
question.
the fact that he was, all these people were being eliminated, so you probably had to
Right.
investigate it, right?
It just makes
And-
you wonder why was the British Secret Service involved in keeping tabs on Kananga to begin with? That part of it's never really explained.
Maybe in this universe, the Britain has strong ties to San Monique.
I suppose. And then, of course, the CIA's involved because we get Felix Leiter and Strutter, who's one of my favorite characters in the entire series, criminally underused in this film.
Mhm.
This is more like Starsky and Hutch.
Yeah,
Hmm.
just kind of brought down to like a down to earth. Here's the case that they have to work on. Street level crime.
Yeah,
almost.
I mean, Richard Maybaum, the screenwriter, commented on it too. Like, to process drugs in the middle of the jungle is not a Bond caper. But I didn't even think about this until fairly recently too. You know, basically, I've seen this movie so many times, but this was the first time where I was actually watching it super critically to prepare for this episode, right? So I was taking a lot of notes. So someone gets assassinated at the United Nations. There's just no follow up on that. You'd think that would be a bigger deal.
Well, especially the way he died with
Ear dynamite, yeah.
ear dynamite, yeah.
And then Bond killing Kananga at the end of this movie. Is this the only time in the series where Bond assassinates the leader of a sovereign nation?
Well, he killed an heir and die another day. So
Oh, you mean Colonel Santon Moon,
yeah, exactly.
aka Gustav Graves?
So not quite the same.
Okay, yeah, you're right. Yeah, he kills the leader of a foreign country in, I would say, the most comic book death in the entire series. I'm talking about the Kananga balloon.
Mm.
I swear, like watching that every time, I'm like, this is a film before my time.
It really does seem like a special effect gone wrong. They do this crash zoom and it's super grainy. And Anton, I sent you the photo of what it was originally supposed to look like on set. Paul, I sent this to you as well. I
Yeah.
think they originally intended it to look a lot more convincing, but it just didn't work out.
I think
It's memorable. I'll give it that.
that's one hell of a way to go. But going back to your previous point about his character, in a lot of the other James Bond films, the stakes are much, much higher in that they always present James Bond with their world domination plan. And I think the miss on this is the fact that he's very much associated with just Harlem in terms of drug distribution. There was no sense that he had this kind of nationwide distribution center. Whereas, all the others that will suddenly show this scale model of the United States, I think like Goldfinger and things like that.
Right.
This is what we're going to do and it's going to affect the entire world. Whereas as you say, it just felt quite low level, even though he said, I'm going to flood the market. But there wasn't really, you didn't get any sense of the scale of his operations. It was effectively a little back room behind a shop.
Yeah, I mean, he says that he's going to use the Filet of Soul restaurants, which, by the way,
Yeah.
great name for a restaurant. But
Yeah.
how many Filet of Soul restaurants are there in the United States? Like, it's not like he's selling them at a McDonald's.
Yeah, what is it, like a papaya dog restaurant? How many of those are there?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Anton, because when he first goes into the Filet of Soul restaurant in Harlem, you can actually see the menu. It's on the wall behind him as he does the booth trick. All super cheap. Yeah. This is how many times I've watched this movie. It's quite sad.
No, so I'm curious just to kind of go back to the Kananga balloon. Is it probably one of the more iconic villain explosions in history, right?
It is, I think, for the wrong reason, just because of how stupid it looks. I mean, it really does look like you're watching a Thunderbirds cartoon, to use an older reference for you, Paul.
Thanks.
I'll say this though. It did kind of remind me of Thunder's explosion in Big Trouble in Little China. You remember that?
I do.
And even that, when I think about it, watching that film, I'm like, this doesn't look real, but I'm still enjoying myself.
Oh, it's funny, but
Yeah.
man, geez.
Yeah. And that's that.
But of course, he could have solved all of that Kananga by simply just shooting him and just pushing his body in with the sharks. But no,
Well, we can't do that, Paul.
you can't do
No.
that. You got to tie them
No.
up and all this kind of malarkey, you know.
You have to have a 30-second dialogue where you explain how the shark pellet gun works, because gosh knows that's not a real thing. It is funny though when he shoots the couch and like Whisper falls. Speaking of Whisper, let's talk about the Henchmen, because this is probably the best henchman in the entire series, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Julius Harris is Teehee. He's a real standout. I love his like crocodile monologue when he gives him the advice. He's like, you just reach into his mouth and pull its teeth out.
He was really friendly to Bond.
Yeah, you could tell he liked him. He didn't want to kill him.
I think even watching the film and looking at his like claw mechanism, it could have looked a lot deadlier, but he definitely used it to very destructive ends.
Yeah, I mean, you get that sense of power when he bends James Bond's pistol, right?
Right, or whenever he just punches through a wall.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to mess with it.
No, but were you expecting his character to come back at the end?
I don't know. As a kid, I probably would have, because you usually know that all the henchmen either have to die at some point, right?
I think maybe it was in Diamonds Are Forever where we really got that trope of villains reappearing to kind of, quote unquote finish the job.
To your point, Anton, you get it in Diamonds, you get it here, and you get it in Man with the Golden Gun.
But it is a pretty like long-standing trope now at this point.
Oh yeah, they would bring it back later in the Brosnan era, but this was a new thing then.
Or even in Austin Powers, they brought it back.
They would, with random tasks. It is weird. Like, he's also in a mailbag. You know, he could have probably just gotten on the train like a normal passenger, but
I will say I was not expecting his return, but there he was.
And then, I mean, Whisper is iconic.
Oh my gosh.
I really annoy my wife with all of his lines. Anybody home? I like how he's progressively getting more angry when Bond can't hear him. He's like, shut up. He really tries to warn Kananga at the end. You know, he's just like, look out. You think he's still in that canister?
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, what a thought.
He suffocated, right? He wasn't getting out of there. No one was going to hear him.
Yeah,
Now,
thanks
Pat,
for
I
that
know
thought.
and Pat, I know you've read the original novel. How does the character compare to the character in the novel?
So Whisper is in the novel. He doesn't have those lines necessarily. Teehee's in the novel too, but he doesn't have a hook. I think they call him Teehee because he giggles. I haven't read it in a while, but the henchmen are definitely from the novel. Now Baron Samedi is not in the novel as a character. They mention him as being like the voodoo god of death or whatnot, but the character Baron Samedi's not in the novel.
Got it.
I mean, he might be the most iconic from the film, right?
Oh,
probably.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because he's kind of like the supernatural element of it all, isn't he?
He's so fun. I love the actor that plays him too, Jeffrey Holder.
Yeah,
Very talented guy.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of seeing him in a show in Jamaica back in, I think, 1990.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. What was the show?
It was just, it's like a dance and music sort of a show by this waterfall kind of thing. It was great. In the evening, lots of fires and stuff. It's brilliant.
Sort
'Cause
of like how they did in the movie.
yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Wait, he
He's
really
supposed
did that? That's interesting. I didn't know that. But
I
he
hope
was a real talent. I mean, if any of the listeners aren't familiar with him, I think he died a long time ago. But I mean, he was a real Broadway dancer.
Mhm.
He won Tony Awards for his work on the musical The Wiz. He was also a very prolific painter. You can find some of his artwork for sale on the internet. He was a real talent. I just wanted to give him a shout out because very, very unique, not only for a Bond character, but just in terms of what he was in real life. He's really someone, if you're into Broadway or anything like that, look him up. I mean, he was also as the 7-Up pitchman on TV in the 70s. Really cool guy. And he creeped me out as a kid in this movie.
Oh, 1,000,000%.
Yeah, really effective performance. When Bond shoots what's revealed to be the fake Baron Samedi and the eyes roll back into the head, creeped me out as a kid.
Oh, I remember just thinking, oh, he just killed that dude.
Yep. And you're like, wait, what? Okay, so here's my question for you both. Is the supernatural in this film real? Did he actually return from the dead?
I think they just kept it quite open because there was obviously an element of him coming up through the grave that was very, mechanical, and it was the guys operating a lift for him. But then you see him on the train at the end.
So I'm
Yeah,
I mean, I'm not fully convinced that he died with those snakes.
I'm not either. No snake can kill you that fast.
And the way he just kind of tumbled in.
And he's like, ugh, ugh, ugh. That's exactly what he sounded like, by the way. I'm not embellishing that at all. I don't know what they were trying to imply. I like how they never really answer it, though, because Solitaire's power obviously seemed real, right?
Yes, they seemed real.
Right. Well, I think she definitely did seem to have powers, especially in towards the beginning when she's predicting a man comes, when he's flying over water, and he's bringing guns and violence and all that. That seemed real.
And like we've touched on, really interesting to have such strong like fantasy and voodoo elements when you don't really get any of this ever again in the series.
No, you don't. They never come close to this again.
And they never really ask those same questions again. And even then, it's really just a bit more keep the audience guessing, not really seriously asking the questions.
Yeah, they're presenting it to you in a very like pulpy way, or it's really not meant to be taken seriously.
Exactly.
So I had this thought while I was watching the film, right? She's really accurate in her predictions and seeing things, right? And he tests her after she slept with Bond on something that was very specific. Wasn't it some sort of number on the back of a watch or something? I can't
Yeah,
remember.
the serial number on the back of
Okay.
his Rolex.
Wouldn't it have been easier for him Kananga just to say, what's the lottery numbers for next week? I just made a load of money that way. If
You would
she's
think that.
so accurate. I'm just thinking,
Yeah, no, it's a good point.
Because there's one thing up, like you say, it's like a man's coming over, he's flying over, he's going to bring death, etc. But that sequence when he was asking her that question, it was very, very specific. And then just got me thinking, well, mind you, if she could predict that, what other things could she predict? The lottery would come to mind.
Yeah, you'd think if you had someone with her powers at your disposal, you wouldn't even need to sell drugs.
Yeah.
Unless you wanted to. Maybe he just liked being a drug lord.
Maybe.
I'm sure there's a lot of things about being a drug lord that are fun.
Well, there's enough TV shows. It always ends in tears, though. By the
It
looks
does.
of
It ends in
Right.
ends in tears for him. The rest of the henchmen, I think, are great. That guy Adam, who's in the boat chase with Bond, I like him. He's got a lot of personality. The cab driver's hilarious. Hey man, for an extra $20, I'll take you to a Ku Klux Klan cookout. It's a great line. All of the villains have such personality in this film, which not a lot of films have, and none of them get a lot of screen time, and they make the most of it, and it speaks a lot to how well written they are and how well acted they are.
Yeah, to a certain extent, you could almost say it's like an ensemble, really.
Oh
Because
yeah.
the amount of
Yeah.
time each of them get.
All right, Jane Seymour, what do we think?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
What?
she's I mean, one of the best women in the series, I think. I mean, she's obviously one of the most beautiful, but I do think her character is really interesting. I think she plays it well. You don't get a ton of backstory with her, except, she's tied to Kananga through her mother, which is, just a terrible fate. But I just like how her whole character is handled, right? How they introduce her, reading off the tarot cards. It's so unique.
They really follow through with the themes, and that continues, of course, with her character. And of course, gotta say, she gave a great performance.
Yes.
I was watching this on Amazon Prime, and they got X-ray,
Hmm.
and I had to pause it as I think she was reading the cards, and you know how if you pause it, the actors' profiles appear on the screen, and one of them was this lady called Nikki Van der Zyl, but I didn't see her on the screen, and I looked it up, and she did some of the voiceover for her when she does the tarot reading. She provided the
Interesting.
voiceover of it, but she also provided the voiceover for Ursula Andress.
Yes,
The
she
French
did
company.
the voices in a lot of Bond films.
Yeah, but never apparently got a credit for it. So I wonder why they needed to use her for Jane Seymour, because the voice seemed pretty good to me.
I just think ADR was very different back then,
Yeah.
and they were probably pretty
Mhm.
lazy with some of the recording.
Still, it was better than some previous films.
Yes, you're right about that. Bond son. The other quote unquote Bond girl in this film, Gloria Hendry as Rosie, not much of a role. She gets sacrificed pretty early. I guess she was written to be annoying, so she played the role well. She didn't have a lot to
Mhm.
do except act scared and incompetent.
Yeah, I think that's the most disappointing part of it. A character didn't have a lot of substance.
No.
That she, either helped Bond defend him or things like that. But then she was told to basically set him up, right? So there wasn't a lot else she could really do apart from sleep with him.
This part of the film, I think, has the weakest writing because I have some questions about her character. First of all, this is a plot hole, in my opinion. Who sends Bond the tarot card at breakfast that tips him off about Rosie?
Yeah, I don't know.
Makes
Doesn't make
no
any sense.
Doesn't make any sense, because I tried to think about this earlier, and one would say, okay, is this like a premonition of Solitaire? But why would Solitaire give away like information about their own organization?
She doesn't even
Unless,
seem to know Bond's coming to the island, right? Or no, she
right,
does.
she does.
Because she predicts death, and she's like, oh, it must have been the girl's death. But at that point, she was already lying to Kananga because she keeps pulling out the lover's card.
So
But who
maybe,
tipped Bond off? It just, there's nobody. Was it Quarrel? But like, why wouldn't he just tell Bond? Like, why give him a card?
Well, it would make more sense if it was Solitaire because they're going to be lovers, so she's protecting him by warning him.
But you'd
But
think they would have mentioned it. Like, he would have said, like, oh, I got your card, thanks. Like, nope. And then I always forget she is a CIA agent. Bond never mentions to Felix Leiter, like, oh, by the way, that like woman that you sent to help me turned out to be a turncoat. It's just never brought up again.
yeah, kind of important feedback to get back to them.
Yeah. We know why he sent her there. It's like they might as well have sent Bond a stripper for the weekend.
Mind you, Felix didn't seem to be that bothered about people's deaths anyway. Like the driver in the New York scene who gets killed didn't seem to be kind of too upset about that.
No. Get me a Macon a white pimp mobile.
Yeah.
Great line. Nelson David George. That's the license plate. I have a hot take, maybe. I think he is a terrible Felix Leiter, this guy David Edison. To your point, Paul, he doesn't seem to care that one of his agents gets killed. He doesn't seem to care that one of his agents was working for the opposition. He doesn't seem to be very competent. He doesn't even see Bond in New York, if you think about it. They only talk on the phone. He's just like, okay, James, you better fly down to San Monique. I think they should have just not even included him in this film because we have a far better, far more cool CIA character in this film, Strutter.
Mm.
I wish that he had simply replaced Leiter in this film. You don't need Felix Leiter in this film.
I think it's another example of characters written inconsistently with how they've been in the past or how they've interacted with Bond. I mean, we also kind of got a sense of a different relationship with Moneypenny in this film too.
Yeah, she really saves him in the beginning. Yeah, she covers up for him when he's what's her name? Caruso, the Italian woman.
Exactly.
Which also begs the question, like, when was the last time your boss turned up at your house to give you instructions?
At 6 a.m. or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, in all the previous Bonds, he's always gone to the office, thrown his hat onto the old hat stand, and walked into that office. But no, he, for some reason, couldn't pick up the phone.
Nope.
It has to turn up. I guess
I like that though. I just thought it was a different spin on it.
Yeah.
It's a shame Q isn't in it. It would have been funnier if Q had showed up too. Imagine if like Q and Moneypenny see the Italian woman just going through his living room. Like, I'm 007.
I think
and like N comes out and he's just like, what are you talking about? Oh, nothing.
I think he's attempting re-entry.
I've got something new for you, 007. They're called condoms. Anyway, we also get Carl Jr. Doesn't have a lot to say, but nice to see him in this. We get the poisonous snake in the bathroom, which is pretty cool. Bond uses the cigar and aftershave.
Nice use of nice use of reptiles in general in this film.
Yeah, there's a bunch of reptiles in this film. It also has one of my all-time greatest fears, which is you're in the back of a car and the driver gets killed and you have to steer from the back seat. Terrifying.
That is pretty terrifying.
Yeah, pretty cool scene. I like the bus chase. But I mentioned this earlier. I do think this movie is too long, and this happens for me when they get to Louisiana. We get that plane chase where they never leave the ground, right? That feels very tacked on. I think you could have easily trimmed that out. Although it is hilarious when the old lady says "Holy shit." That always makes me laugh.
Yeah, it's not very clear how he actually escapes.
No, because he pulls up to the office, right? And it's like, why aren't they still chasing him?
Yeah, it's like they've all dived into various other places, and then it's like, oh, are they unconscious, or they just then, do you know what? Let him go.
Right.
He's beaten
And
us.
it doesn't make sense from a storytelling point of view, right? Because, okay, so Bond and Solitaire, they land in New Orleans, right? They immediately get captured by the New York cabbie and they get driven to the airfield. But then Bond escapes and then he meets up with Felix. They go to the Filet of Soul and he gets caught again with like the cool table lowering into the floor move. And then that ultimately leads to the crocodile farm and the boat chase, right? You could have just cut out part of that. This is the part of the film that has the pacing issues. The crocodile farm, it's iconic, right? It's some of the best stunts in the series.
Mm-hmm.
Ross Kananga, he suggested the stunt of Bond jumping on the crocodiles. He was enlisted by the producers to perform it. It took 5 takes to get it right. Yes, people, that is a real stunt with real crocodiles. Yep. You can watch the bloopers on YouTube. It's fascinating.
The bloopers are pretty wild.
Wild. Again, something that would never happen now.
What was the fact that I think was it in the bloopers they said that the crocodiles, because he had done it a couple of times, the crocodiles knew what was going to happen.
Yeah.
So they were ready for him, which is quite scary.
And then that leads to the boat chase, right? And then while I think this sequence is really well filmed, it goes on for a while. And of course, it doesn't help that we get J.W. Pepper in it.
So just going back to the crocodile scene, why did Teehee and his henchmen just walk away? Why wouldn't you watch just to make sure?
Maybe they didn't want to. Maybe he had flashbacks of losing his arm.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, it's the only explanation. But I don't know. I just think this entire chunk of the film is where it just really slows down.
I'm trying to think, like, how do we put it into this category where if we look at other films that follow like the same mistake, is it just explaining too much how to get to a scene?
Yes, I think so. Because like I pointed out, he lands in New Orleans, he gets captured, then he escapes at the airfield, then he just gets captured again 10 minutes later.
Right. So I feel like there should just be more trust in the audience to be able to use their imagination to fit in. How did a character get here? If it makes sense once one scene cuts to another. I think there was just a bit too much of going along the journey of each and every step to get to point A to point B.
This was something that we're going to talk about this more in the next Bond film we cover, Anton, Man with the Golden Gun, which I think also has pacing issues. And the film after that, The Spy Who Loved Me, was a really big course correction on their part. I think they took this criticism to heart and did their best to course correct after that.
That's fair.
Oh, Billy Bob.
But hey, they said, you know what's going to make this film even better? Let's just throw in more J.W. Pepper.
Yeah, I almost fast forward through it. That's my brother-in-law.
But I remember going back to when I was 8. That did not seem like a long sequence to me. That was just fantastic sequence of boats flying through the air, shooting each other, smashing into trees, etc. And then the whole wedding scene, etc. I as a kid, I thought this is really impressive. But I wonder if, like, in today's viewing habits, like you say, that maybe it's that a little bit too long now.
Maybe I'm being harsh, but like, do you agree with me, Paul? Like that whole section of the film, I just think it takes a while.
Yeah, I mean it does. I don't think it needed the Billy Bob brother bit. I don't think that really did. And also the punchline for that, which was the fact that the black goon took the boat and he said, "That's my brother." The payoff wasn't there, or they didn't make much of it. Which is, "Oh, that's your brother."
Right.
To me, it was a fairly slam dunk, but they didn't follow up on it.
And again, even if they had, would that have aged well now? No.
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 But again, it's a play on the character, though, isn't it?
It is, yeah. What are you, some kind of doomsday machine?
Come on, they're great.
I mean, he's quotable. I'll give him that.
Yeah.
But geez, one of the guests we had, Ryan,
Mm-hmm.
he was asking me like, where should I start when I watch these older ones? And I was like, well, I probably wouldn't start with Live and Let Die, even
Yeah,
though I like it.
it's a fun film, and there's no getting around that. But if you want to get to know Bond, I don't think it's a great starting point.
No, and I agree with you. This movie is a lot of fun, but it's to your point. Yeah, this is one you should watch after you're already familiar with the character and the template. But the locations in this film are great. It's the only time we see Bond in New York, if only briefly. New Orleans is a great setting in any film. Anytime we can go to the Caribbean, I'm not going to complain. I think it's really nice, Anton, that Bond got to stay at the Polynesian Resort in Disney World.
Exactly.
Yeah, I do like the locations. I did read that this film had a different aspect ratio.
That's right. It was a direct decision from this film from the previous film.
Yeah, Paul. The previous films had been shot in widescreen, 235 to 1, and this had 1 to 85. So this was shot flat, to use an industry term.
Mm-hmm.
It was not taking advantage of the full Panavision format, and I assume this just must have been done to cut costs. Because if you're shooting an anamorphic, it's more expensive. It requires more lighting to shoot the scenes, especially things like miniatures. I also noted all the previous films had been printed on Technicolor, and this was not. So this was one of the first films in the series where there was a concerted effort to save money. I think Diamonds Are Forever suffered from that a little bit too.
But do you think because of the storyline, the drug thing, etc., that it didn't need to have that kind of widescreen, super widescreen cinema scope type
Possible.
view?
No,
Do you know what I mean?
I-
It's a lot tighter in that aspect, the 185 aspect ratio.
I could see that, Paul. I also think it lends itself more to like the graininess of the story, or even just the way that it looks on the screen. Maybe it does fit more thematically.
Well, knowing what I know about Harry Saltzman, I think they were doing it to save money. Because after The Man with the Golden Gun, he had so much debt that he was forced to sell his share to United Artists. So he had a lot of financial issues by 1973.
Was that through the films that he was financing or other?
It was a combination of things. He financed a couple of films that bombed at the box office. Battle of Britain was the most
Oh yeah.
the biggest example. He was also, speaking of Technicolor, he was a major shareholder in Technicolor. And by the early 1970s, I'm far from an expert on this stuff, but my understanding is that they were rapidly losing their market share in Hollywood. And Paul and I already talked about this, but Anton, title song, masterpiece.
In my top of all time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great
Thank you,
title
Wayne.
sequence too, with the skulls and the torches. It's perfection.
Okay, I would slightly disagree. I love the skulls, I love the flames, but some of the dancing in that,
Like the waving at the sky dancing.
it looked like someone was cleaning a shower.
Oh no, you ruined it. No.
Sorry, man. But yeah,
You're not wrong. Well, okay, I liked it up until that point.
all right. But other than that, yeah, it fitted really well with the music.
That's what I should have said. Oh. Anton, I know you had to step away for a moment during the production history, but I don't know if you caught this when I said it earlier, but when George Martin brought the song to the producers, Saltzman wanted someone else to sing it, and Martin had to very politely tell him, okay, if you don't want McCartney, you don't get the song.
And that is why I'm so glad that happened in history.
Yeah. It's just like, what an idiot. Like,
seriously.
This guy
Like, why?
Saltzman, I don't know about him. I don't think Broccoli did either. They were really not getting along by this point, too. And the score is amazing. I love the George Martin score.
Now, not the legendary John Barry, but
He
still,
did an admirable job filling in for him.
and fit the film perfectly.
Yeah.
Like a Shaft, but secret agent.
Yeah, it's really funky in the best way. Well, gentlemen, do we have anything to add about the plot, the characters, the production, anything?
The only other point I would make about it is that, they Solitaire and James Bond end up on the train at the end, and the implication is that they're kind of effectively a couple, right?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get a sense of that throughout the film, that kind of relationship was blossoming that well. But But from a purely technical point of view, is it actually possible to have to have sex on a bunk in a train?
If anyone can do it, it's James Bond.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
But it looked pretty snug fit even with Jane Seymour just on her own.
I've never traveled by train like that on a sleeper car.
I've done it once and I'll never do it again.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, it looks glamorous in movies, but yeah,
Doesn't look comfy.
no.
No.
Well, you didn't have to fight Julius Harris, did you, Paul?
Well, that is true. Yeah. No, I just had to fight 2 suitcases and the little ladder to take me to the top bunk.
And Jane Seymour wasn't there, was she?
I have to be very quiet now because my wife might listen. But no, she wasn't.
Okay.
No, sadly.
Understandable. Okay. Well, I think we can wrap it up then and give our ratings. Paul, as always, we offer to let the guest go first, but you don't have to if you don't want to, whatever you are comfortable with.
Okay. So I'm really conflicted because I want to give it a high mark, but I want to give it enough width because I feel that The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker were better films. So I'm stuck between a B plus and an A minus.
Oh, so you really like this movie?
Yeah, very.
yeah.
very generous.
I'm trying to see it through the eyes of my childhood rather than
Oh, no, that's okay. I love it.
yeah. So I'm gonna stick with a B plus for this
Okay.
one.
Anything to say in summation?
I think this was a brilliant start for the Roger Moore era. I think it had all the right ingredients. Yeah, it wasn't like a world domination evil plotter, but I think it touched all the right points. I think Anton, you said, it had the gadgets, the locations, the girls, all those things that you associate with Bond. But Roger Moore brought that kind of suave, funny one-liners, and it ticked all the boxes for me at the time.
Fantastic. For me, for this film, it is such a fun film. When I think about the Bond series, it's not the most serious one. This actually, of course, is when we get in the direction of the film being a bit more lighthearted, and we really do get a lot of that with that J.W. Pepper comedic relief. But even considering the more humorous tone, there's still everything that we love about this Bond template. And when having this film be your launching point for Roger Moore, it's a very brave decision considering the huge departure from the typical elements that we've had in previous films and really injecting a very new, very different focus in the film, especially in the setting and the characters and the iconic henchmen. And I feel like that all hit really well. And, I love the score. I think that for me, the pacing was, a bit slow at times. I think that it was a little silly. And I think that even then, when I look at some of the effects, it still doesn't quite hold up. But I think it's still a very fun film. Not the most deep Bond film, not a plot that makes the most sense, but I think that it had a lot of fun, and this film knew that it was going to be a fun film, and they executed very well considering, again, this was Roger Moore's debut. So all that considered, for me, like, this film isn't the highest tier, but it is a fun film, and I would for sure watch this again. I think for me, this is a C plus.
I have always thought pretty highly of this film. I have this ranked somewhere just outside of my top 10 favorite Bond movies, meaning it's not in that upper tier, but it is on the higher side of my, what I call the middle tier Bonds. This was a very fun movie to rewatch. I will continue to rewatch this movie. And just a reminder that, rewatchability does not always equate with quality. There are certainly some bad films that I enjoy rewatching despite their badness. And this is not a bad film. I think this is a good film. Roger Moore really hit the ground running with this. It's a great debut performance. He's so charismatic and so confident and so likable. I think the plot is pretty wonky and the stakes are pretty low, but I think overall the story and the setting are unique. It does have a lot working in its favor. Solitaire is an iconic Bond girl. Yaphet Kotto is a great villain in Kananga. There's an amazing crew of henchmen. There's great locations. There's some really awesome stunts. I really like the score, and it's one of, if not the best title songs in the series, thanks to Paul McCartney. But there are some things in here that I just don't think have aged well. The obvious racial stuff. J.W. Pepper in general, I really just can't stand him, despite him being memorable. There are some pacing issues, which I pointed out. But this is a very fun movie, and more than anything else, Roger Moore proved that the series could continue without Sean Connery. It's an outlier in the series, but I do like it quite a bit without thinking that it is a great film. I think it's good. I think it has some flaws, but overall I can overlook them, and I give this a B-. And that, gentleman, is Live and Let Die. Paul, as always, it is a pleasure. This was a real fun time talking James Bond with you.
Likewise, yeah, it's great to revisit these films, and to talk about them. I've learned so many different things from both you and Anton's perspective as well. So yeah, thank you very much for inviting me.
Of course, we will have you back soon. And Paul, of course, I will be seeing you in a few weeks.
Indeed, very much looking forward to seeing you.
Yeah, it's been too long since I've been over to your side of the pond.
Yeah, make sure you got your navy tie.
I actually, funny you mentioned it, I do own the Royal Navy tie in this film.
Wow.
I don't know how appropriate it would be to wear it in the UK, though. We'll see. Anton's like, whatever, man.
Well, I hope to see some fun photos of all the antics you two get up to. I'm sure you'll find yourself some trouble.
Oh, we absolutely will.
Excellent. Love to hear it.
And that's it for this edition of Why Wasn't It Better? We will be back next week for our first animated film of the season, Anton. Final Fantasy, The Spirits Within.
More like Final Fantasy, They Stole My Soul.
You ever see that, Paul?
Is that the anime? That's the animated one, right? The
It is.
CGI'd.
Yep.
I can't really remember the story, but I remember being pretty impressed.
Whoa, really?
With the CGI.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I'm fighting against the tide by the sounds of it.
I don't want to spoil anything, but
yeah. Listeners, tune in next week when we talk more about this Final Fantasy film.
Indeed. We will see you then. Take care, everyone. Thanks for listening to Why Wasn't It Better? If you've made it this far, it's safe to assume that you like what you hear. If you have not already done so, please hit that subscribe button and become a follower wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. If you really like what you hear, you can contribute to our podcast monetarily and sign up for our Patreon. So whether you're commuting, chilling at home, or embarking on a nostalgia-fueled movie adventure, make Why Wasn't It Better your go-to podcast companion.